Thank you, and thank you, Stanley. So Stanley invited me to this conference, asked me to come up with some stories. So we're gonna start with the fairy tale. And the fairy tale goes like this. Behind 7 seas, behind 7 mountains, there's a magic kingdom. And in this magic kingdom, when the customer comes, they already know what they want. You've seen this Magic Kingdom, hasn't it? And by the way, the team know how to do it. And nothing changed along the way. So here's the thing. You guys laughing. There might be some reason for this one, but have you seen people believing they're living in the Magic Kingdom? Those are the guys running through your organization, most cases in a magic wand in their hand, waving different spells like I wish you deliver by Monday or I want you to do something by Tuesday. And here's the thing, how do we survive in the world that changed? So the next story we're gonna share will be your story. So it's 9:10 in the morning, and I want you to wake up a little bit by sharing a conversation with the person next to you. So this can be pair, this can be pair can be up to 3 people in this group, max. And start with, you won't believe what happened to me recently. So think about, you go to the office, you open your laptop, and something has happened overnight. What was that? So share this story with the person next to you. What was that? How did it impact your work? How does it impact your product? And what are the consequences? By the way, we're going to have just 3 minutes for that, so keep it short. Don't go into all details about the API problems you had, okay? So 3 minutes, pairs up to 3 people, and we're gonna talk about why this is important for us. All right, so let me ask the question, how many of you has shared this kind of positive surprise, like a really kind of surprise, like a super cool? Oh, we have 2 people here, awesome. How many of you have shared more like a oh shit surprise? Yeah, these are the one that comes more often to us, right? So we will think about this like this can be a small surprise, like, you know, like 2 weeks ago, Monday, we wake up just to learn that the WordPress just did update on our website, and our website is no longer working. And you know what? Next Monday, they fix the problem and the website is no longer working again because we fixed their problem before that. And now we can't wait till the next Monday, by the way, and see what's going to happen. So the thing is, if I were to draw your knowledge over time, then every of this single surprise we just talked about, is it going to give us more knowledge or less knowledge about product you have? More knowledge, basically. So if I draw it, I'm gonna try this one. Let's see how it works. Oops. Okay. So basically what you have this small steps or getting more and more knowledge. And by the way, with most of those steps of getting more and more knowledge, you get this oh shit sound. So one lesson from this talk is, oh shit means you have a new knowledge in your organization, right? So here's the thing. The problem is we don't know how much we don't know yet. So you may go to production so you can release and then get a new knowledge, right? And by the way, this was a talk yesterday about AI, reducing the quality of the code we put on the production. But it's not just the time of AI, then we have this kind of problem. So my favorite story about getting a new knowledge is from NASA, from 1998, when NASA was sent probe to Mars. And 1999, the probe reached the Mars, and then with the full speed hit the Mars. Well, post-mortem, in this case that's a good name, by the way, post-mortem they discovered that NASA was using metric system, but subcontractor they decided to use the English system. This kind of learning, it cost them $350,000. So no matter what you do, most likely you're cheaper than us anyway. And the reason we talk about this is because there are things we know, but there are also knowledge that we're missing, in two areas. So for sure, let me try doing this with both hands. So for sure, all right. Now I'm gonna try this one. Watch me doing this one. So we had knowledge. So these are the things you know that you know. It's cool. And there are things we know that we don't know. So you know the question, but you don't know the answer. And in project management, they call it risk. And the thing is that you can manage risk. So you can ask the question, you can search, you can do some research, you can do some upfront analysis to address the risk. But in software development, the biggest area you're missing is unknown. So the things you don't know that you don't know. And the moment they blow up, there's a oh shit moment. And that's the problem in the software development, that most of the knowledge, we just don't know that we don't know. Because if you think about this NASA example, they knew there are two different systems. They just didn't know that the other company can use the second one, so they didn't ask the question. So the problem with unknowns is that we hardly know what kind of question we need to ask. And that is the pain we have, because most cases, what we need to do, we need to discover this knowledge as quickly as possible, because those unknowns are basically in three areas. So there are business unknowns, and this is basically what the competitors are going to do. But this is also what your government is going to do. I don't know how it's here in Singapore, but in Poland you can wake up in the morning and just figure out that there is a new law that you are supposed to introduce 2 weeks ago. So basically every time everything changes. Well, I'm not going to mention any kind of like a COVID stuff, because that's obvious, but there are a lot of things that can impact you. Or maybe some tariffs by some random country in this world. So the thing is, like, there are things that will happen and you don't know that they're going to happen. And this is the pain. And also, often we assume they won't happen, and we are more surprised by that one. So technology, so anything like our WordPress case, but there is also like a new technology coming in, disruptive technology like AI. We already talked about. I need to mention AI on the Agile conference by now. But also people and interaction. You need to talk with other people basically doing software, right? It's pretty hard not to do it. And there are differences. So any moment your product owner change, or your customer change, or some representative at your customer change, the whole dynamic change. And you can learn a lot about people you have not involved in your product development. Like, for example, the law department, right? Anyone has a situation when you forget to ask the law department if you can go to production? Oh, it's pretty common in banks. And the consequences, by the way, talking about the people in interaction, I hope you appreciate the high context slide I have. So not much text, but a big font, thanks to that. People in the back can read. You're welcome. And the consequence of that is that we just are pretty bad at planning. And we're pretty bad at guessing what is going to happen. And it doesn't mean that our product, we just miss like a deadline by a few weeks, or we miss the budget estimate by a few %. It means that we plan for like $500,000 and then we deliver with $1.5 million. That's not that's a real story. That's not a made up example. And these are the story I see in different companies, I see in different organizations. So we are wrong in those three areas. I'm just going to focus on product management because I just have an hour for this talk. And in product management, the thing is that we are wrong. And the good product managers are the people who know they are wrong. And the best product managers are the people who are constantly looking for the ways they are wrong. So we can think about any simple solution, like figuring out that your users are ignoring the way you want them to use your product. But also, some of those overused can be utilized for getting more customers. So there's a great book, by the way, released like a few months ago called Lizard Optimization, when Gojko Adzic is showing how you can look at the different ways your customer are abusing your system and get more customer from this one. So one of the story Gojko is sharing is people start complaining that the payment is not working on his website, and he check everything, all the connection, and he say everything is fine, the payment is working, and you know the customer say no, it's not working. So can you send me the screenshot so I can see what is happening? And they send a screenshot, and the screenshot is in Spanish. The thing is, like, the website was never designed to be in Spanish. It's in English. So how come they come to Spanish? Well, they put the link into the Google Translate, and the Google Translate everything, including variables. So you know what? Payment doesn't work. Now, here's the question for you. Are you going to ignore the whole Spanish community, or are you going to change your website so people can use this through Google Translate to get your results? So often you find the things that you didn't know, and then you're trying to utilize this for getting new customer, new business. All right. So the thing is, if we are wrong, then we need to validate your idea, right? And question is, how much time you need from the idea to knowing that your idea is great, and if that can be anything. So I know banks in Africa that basically, the story ahead, product owners coming in the morning, and in the evening they have this on production. At the same time, I know banks in Poland, when the product owner comes in the morning, and 1.5 years later they have it on production. And often what the company look like is like how fast our team is doing this one, not how fast our company is doing this one. So I have this kind of conversation with another company, and they say, we're pretty good at delivering. 3 months is max we need. Cool, so we go to production after 3 months. No. We send it on another department to deliver. So we design the solution in 3 months, and then another department spend another year delivering this to production. So this is something Jürgen Desmet called modern waterfall. So you have a CEO and executives meeting for the design. So you come up with the solution, with the problem, then you give it to the UX department, then you give it to UI department, then you give it to development department, then you give it to integration department, and there is an ops department at the end of the story. So a great quote from Mary Poppendieck is basically, figure out how to deliver software before customer will change their mind. And if you manage to do this one, you don't need to manage the change request. There are no change requests in your system anymore. So here's the question for you. Some pictures, Ivona with me. All right, so here's the question for you. And again, same groups, or if there are new people, then make sure that the new people join your conversation. Why it's taking us so much time? So why going to production with single feature, single solution taking 1 year, 2 years in an organization? Okay, 3 minutes, small groups, 2-3 people have this conversation, and we'll go forward from this one. So the good answer, my answer for this one, the observation I made, is basically most of the time what we do, we are waiting. So we are waiting for one of those things. Either other teams, decisions, this could be also informations, but often someone needs to let you do something, even if you can do this, you're still waiting for decision, or resources. By the way, you know people are not resources, you're this Agile conference. Here what I have in mind, share environments, testing environments, this kind of stuff. So anything that we need to share with other team, other people, you need to get access to. So I don't know, long time ago when we worked in Motorola, we had one environment for testing in the whole world, so it wasn't easy to get access to this one. The thing is, like, if you look into the organization, there is no one waiting in the organization, so everyone is busy. And the problem is, like, because we look at the people if they are busy, not if the feature is busy. So unless we do the value stream mapping, something that already was mentioned yesterday during the morning keynote by Rowan, unless we look at the value stream mapping, it seems everybody is just busy. But the moment we look at the value stream mapping, what we discovered, like we work on the feature for like 2, maybe 6%. You mentioned 5%, so this is something that the value we see in action. And one of the reasons we are waiting basically in the organization, and you probably know this one because this is a less conference, we have some dependencies. That could be internal dependencies, that could be external dependencies or regulation, but most cases, these are the same dependencies we already mentioned before. So we're waiting for the team because we're missing the competency. We're waiting for someone else to make a decision. We're waiting for the infrastructure. Now, this can happen on the feature level, but this can happen on sort of the organizational level, but you get exactly the same dynamic on the team level, on the sprint level. So you don't see much of this one, but this is the screenshot from the video, so you can watch the video later by Dragan Stepanovic showing the dynamic of the sprint. So how does the async code review impact the speed of delivering feature? And basically the story goes, I'm not going to share the whole story, you can watch the video there later on, it's awesome by the way. So Emma is working on the ticket, and finally she asked Luca to do the review. So Luca, he was busy with something else, so a few days later Emma is asking, hey, can you do the review please? And then Luca is doing the review, but Emma wasn't waiting for Luca to do the review, so when Luca say, hey, can you fix it this way, Emma is taking, again, few hours, she fixes it, and Luca say, no, this is not what I mean, so she fixes it, and they go to production, and it takes days. And if they sit together, that would take hours, right? So the same dynamic that happened on the feature level, you have exactly the same dynamic on the sprint level. Now, most of the companies, when they see this one, they are first of all surprised. So most cases, we know it's slow, and still when the management, when the senior management, they are involved in those value stream mapping exercise, they are pretty surprised how long it takes to deliver. And I'm not talking just about the big corporation, big bugs, but I'm also talking about the small organizations, so like any kind of startup. They still take hours, days, months to deliver anything to production, and they're pretty surprised. And often what I'm hearing was, yes, Tomek, we are slow, but at least we are effective. And okay, you know the story probably. And now we go to the concept from Toyota, from lean production, is like, just because you're busy doesn't mean that you deliver value. So the question is, this is by the way not my picture, this is the picture from Tachiono book. The question is, are you just busy? So are you just doing something, or are you delivering value? In most cases, we are just busy, right? So there is a daily, and the developer joins daily. Let's call him John for this story. And John says, well, I sent him email to another developer. He didn't respond, so I took care of something else. Which makes sense from John's perspective, because he doesn't want to do nothing. He wants to be busy, right? He wants to add value. Except that as a consequence of this one, he is changing context. And we know that it's super expensive. So the more features you have in progress, the more items you're trying to do at the same time, the more likely you're going to change the context. Now, because John has so much stuff to do, he can easily change the context. There is no reason for John to go to another person and say, hey, hi, why do you don't answer my question? And by the way, I know why you're not answering my question, because you're so busy as well. So I'm gonna wait for you till you finish what you do, and I'm gonna take care of something else. As a consequence of that, every single employee in your organization is going to have a huge queue. So one of the consequences of multitasking, a separate content of the dependencies, is that your queue is going to explode. Because everybody, if we need to have everybody busy, then we need to have enough work to continue working even if you are stopped by someone else. So if you have a dependencies, then you have a lot of work. And it happened on the developers level. So every developer they has own queue. But this also happened on the organizational level. And in some extremes, you can have 40 people working in 200 projects. That's again really a case story. And you know what? If you have 40 people working in 200 projects, then most time what you spend on is basically trying to coordinate those projects. So you spend time preparing for the next 2 days meeting when you're going to report those 200 projects. Then you report those 200 projects to senior management. Then you spend another week recovering from those 2 days. And then you start preparing for the next meeting that is coming in, in a few weeks from now. So most time, what you do, you spend coordinating. There was a great story, I think that's from Bas Vodde. He said there was a company who wanted to optimize the cost, so they fire 100 developers, also they outsource 100 developers, and because they need to coordinate those 100 developers, they hire 100 project managers to do that. So this external coordination is cost as this also costs as well. Now let's go back for our John story. So imagine that John managed to finish his work. It's ready for testing. So what is happening right now? What are we doing right now? That's a question. So John finished coding. We good to start testing. What we do? That's one option. We search for the tester. Even if we know the tester, what we usually do when we know the tester, we know who is going to test it. What is going to happen usually? Most likely we're going to wait for the environment, but before we wait for the environment, we're gonna wait for the tester, because the tester needs to be busy as well. So the tester has his own queue as well, right? So it's not what is not going to happen in most cases. Our developer, our John, won't go to tester and say, hey, I want you to test this one because I know you're busy. So most likely what is going to happen, I'm going to write in Jira that I'm done, and the ticket will be waiting for the tester to pick it up. And one of the consequences of this one is like, the tester has no idea what you did, because you put everything into the tool, so we have no idea what you did. So the tester will need to guess. And 2 days later, 2 weeks later, the tester starts guessing. He starts testing this one. He finds a bug, and he says, hey, there is a bug. And he won't go to John for sure, because John is busy with something else. So he's gonna write this again in Jira. And 2 days later, 2 weeks later, John reopened the ticket. He find there is a problem. He opened the code. That was like, few weeks now from the moment he wrote the code. So he see the code for the very first time. He never remember, writing this code. So the thing that he need to do, he need to learn everything in the system, right? And as a consequence of that, because there is a lot of learning, we'll be creating a lot of documentation. So as a side effect of that, for every single ticket you have a plenty of documentation that wouldn't happen if you have a time for conversation, right? So the challenge we have is, we think we are here, slow but at least efficient. The problem is most of the work we do is just waste. So in fact, what we discover, instead of being here, we're just here. And instead of trying to be more efficient, try to be faster. And the moment you've discovered how to be faster, then you can try to be efficient as well. So the whole concept is, how do we speed up? So question we want to ask is your system designed to support collaboration, or is the system designed to block collaboration? Well, this is the closed question, so that is super bad question. And as I've been talking for the last 15 minutes, this is probably the good moment for you to have a conversation. So I want you to have a more open question than this one, because this is yes, no question, so you're gonna be done in few seconds. I want you to have a conversation about your organization. Which part of your organization is supporting people to focus on one item, and which part of organization is blocking your people to work on one item, okay? 3 minutes again, short conversation, and I'm gonna share a few more stories after that. All right, just quick check. Anyone want to share? Okay, let's try this one.
So in our organization, we don't have testers.
Is it helping you to cooperate or not?
Sorry?
Is it helping you to cooperate or not?
We remove the handoffs.
Oh, thank you. Another example? That's fine. Oh yeah, we have one.
It's currently designed to be more collaborative. Used to be like all the upstream team just have their own projects, and then we don't know, then suddenly they will just come and say, hey guys, we need to release this and we need to implement this and have this ready in 6 months time. You guys do it. It's like, but now the COO is actually taking everybody, come together, list down all your projects and get all the teams to basically say, I need this many people to support that, and then prioritize based on that.
Yeah, so there was a little more into this one because you have first of all you have conflicting priorities. Then you often get a feature like by the way, you guys are half a year behind the schedule, so go and implement this one. And often, because if you don't know what are the priorities, then basically you're going to work on the random items, right? The items you think are important for the organization. And often, when everybody has their own backlog, which happen often in a large organization, then most cases you don't work on the things that are important for the organization. You work on the items you think that are important from your perspective, which are completely separate things, right? Often. And we have this kind of information in one case is like, you know what, in our organization, the CEO can go to the developers and tell him what to do. And what is going to happen? Most cases, nothing, because they're going to ignore the CEO anyway. So this happens in the organization. So often what you discover, CEO has a little impact on what is the most important items, and people on the bottom organization, they decide what is the most important because they think it's important, because it's a pet project, because it's something they care about. And one of the things I discover is that if you have, like, I don't know, whatever number of backlogs you have in the organization, is one backlog, is 5 backlogs, it's often one backlog per developer or per person in some organization. What I discover is, beside having official backlogs, anything you have in Jira or whatever you use, you have at least another group of the same amount of backlogs that are hidden. These are like emails, Slack messages, something you ask me when we've been called for a coffee, anything like that. So if you have 100 items in your backlog, then assume there is another 100 items you don't know about in your organization. And often the top of the organization has no idea what is in the backlogs. So one of the things I discovered is, like, rather than trying to focus on the this fancy agile metrics like velocity, who cares about, focus on what is important. What is the collaboration friction? What is the cost of collaborating together? Because often what the companies do, and it's kind of interesting, is companies do everything to force people not to collaborate. Every company say, hey, we want to work as a team, and then they do everything to force you not to collaborate. So one of those things I discovered is like a roles and responsibilities. Something you mentioned is like, we have a separate department that do this and separate department that do this, or we have a tester that, the developers cannot test because it's the tester role for different reasons, right? And I had this conversation a long time ago. It's like we have a super bad quality of the code, and we have this kind of conversation with the developers, and the developer says, I know what you want from us. So I ask, what I want from you? You want us to test. And is that's bad? Yes, because they force us to test later. So assuming that's not my role and responsibilities, I say, hey, we don't want to test. So we agree that the developers won't be testing, but what we will be doing from the next Monday, will be checking the application. So we didn't do any testing. We just meet every Monday morning for 4 hours, and everybody was checking what is happening in the application. And the reason for that is that it was so bad quality that we couldn't do anything on this. And the reason for bad quality is basically the time pressure, because we are adding feature, no one was removing the bugs. And when the developers discover how bad the quality of the software is, they start fixing problems. I wouldn't even mention to them few weeks before, because they were so low priority, those problems, that I didn't care about this, because when your application isn't working, you don't mention that there is some problem with the text on your website, right? And they discover those problems, and they fix the problems, and they start fixing those problems. And the thing is, like, the moment they started fixing the problems, the application was more stable. The moment the application was more stable, testers could do more testing, because they didn't care about why the application is not running at all. I could do the testing. By the way, that was 15 years ago, so that's a long story. We don't do this anymore. We don't do manual testing anymore, right? We know that. So roles and responsibility is one of the pain. And yesterday we had this great presentation about roles in the organization, and you had engineering as a role. So when we joined Motorola a long time ago, the title I had it was software engineer. And for the next 2 years, I was doing different things, including coding in how it's anyway. There's the Asian language. I just forget the name. So I was doing different strange things and having the same title. So the broader title you have in the organization, the whole concept in Scrum, the whole concept in LeSS, you have a developer as your title, rather than having tester, analytic. The analytic is going to help you collaborate, because the goal for people is basically to collaborate. And we have this kind of situation. Developers comes to me and say, "Hey Tomek, since we started the Scrum and LeSS thing, I do code less." I say, "And what you do?" "Well, I need to talk with other departments, I need to talk to customer, I need to make sure that it's deployed on production, all this stuff." "Okay, and what's your goal?" "Yeah, I know." So he knew that his goal is not to create a lot of code, because code is work in progress as well. He knew that his role is to deliver to production. And that is completely different approach. The moment that people discover that their goal is to deliver something that has a value, not to do the task, magic happens in the organization, right? And no matter what kind of work you do, the moment people discover that it is not to do my job. So roles and responsibility is one of this way of avoiding collaboration. The second one, we already mentioned, work in progress. The more work in progress you have, the more likely people will, switch to something else just to be busy. So if you limit work in progress, a consequences of that is that people start to look how I can help other people. And that's kind of interesting thing that happen. We already mentioned different priorities from different part of the organization. So pet projects. So there was CEO saying something, and the organization is doing completely different. Tools are also a great way to force you not to collaborate. Any kind of Jira kind of tools is like the best way not to force people not to collaborate is to put collaboration into the tool, because people stop talking to each other, right? So. Talking about the work in progress, one of the most difficult conversation organization have is like how many items, top priority items, your organization have, and you go to organization and you ask what is the top priority, and they say yes, and they say because we need to do this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. Yeah, what is top priority? You don't understand our context, Tomek. We need to do everything at once. So we did one experiment with a logistic company, and we came up with, hey, we went to every single department and say, hey guys, can you divide your projects, your initiative to something that is super important, that's one, something that is important, that's two, and something that not so critical, that's three. You know what? Everything was one, except for like two initiatives, right? And then the finance department comes in and say, well, okay, that's one, but ours zero. And then the CEO comes in and say, hey, that's fine, but mine is -1. So when everything is important, then basically the prioritization is done by developers. Again, basing on what they know, what they think is important, what they care about, right? And this is a difficult conversation to happen. And one great example is, a few years back, I was asked to visit a customer. Of course, the problem is not the prioritization. The problem, they say, okay, we have a problem with estimates. And the thing you learn within software development, anytime you hear the problem is with estimate, you know the problem is not with estimates, that's for sure. So I have a conversation, what is the problem you have? And they say, well, we promise something to the customer, we don't deliver. Okay. So we decide to have a workshop with the senior executive. We run this workshop, we look at the data they have, and they say, Tomek, we have a problem because we plan something for sprint and we don't get what we want. So my assumption is because everybody is busy in an organization, they maybe deliver, part of that. So I say, well, maybe you get a half of what you want. They say, no, we don't get what we want. We get something else. This is a senior executive telling me on the meeting. By the way, that's like 50, 60 people company. So that's not a 5,000 people company. That's 60 people. Executives say we don't get what we want. We get something different. Okay, so let's look at the data. How many big items you have delivered last sprint? So that was small less adoption. So they look at the data, say right, like 6. All right. How many big items you have right now in progress? Like 36. So how likely from those 36 you're going to get the items you care about, not your developers care about? Yeah, but in this case we would need to tell developers to work on the important items, not the items they care about. Yes, this is the prioritization, right? So what you often discover is like prioritization is telling your people not to work on items they want to work on, but work on items that are important. And the consequences of this one is like, well, sometimes you don't do what is nice to do, sometimes you do what is important for your customer. That's a crazy idea, by the way. So one of the things you can do, no matter what how many backlogs you have, is just create one backlog. One of the great things is like a visualize your backlog. And one of the best things is visualize physically your backlog. Because if you have 200 items and you print out every single item on one post-it note, then you see how much items you have. So coming back to the story of this 200 items organization, what I told them, they have, by the way, they have the wall like here, like a glass wall. And I say to them, my recommendation, print every single item on the separate A4 paper, put them on the wall. The next time someone comes in with a new initiative, take them to the corridor and ask them which one we're gonna kill to start your item. Because most organizations, it's super easy to start new feature, start new initiative, right? You go and search your organization for someone who will fund your initiative. So you ask one CEO, one executives. If you don't agree, then you go to another executives and so on, so on. And finally, you find someone who will fund your project, so you start 201 project. Oh, by the way, if you have 200 projects, they most likely gonna take years to deliver. So if your project takes at average like 4 years to deliver, then if you have 2025 now, then you most likely need to start any project you want to have 2029 on production, right? At average. So probably 2030 is also a good idea to start by now. Another interesting thing that we discover is how many people, even if you discover what is the most important initiative, because if everything is important, everybody works on the most important initiative, that's cool, right? But if you discover that you have one most important initiative, then you discover that you have one person working on this initiative, maybe 5 people. One of the reasons is like a narrow specialization of people or legacy technology. So again, especially in banking, again, I don't know how it's here, but in Poland we have those all fancy legacy system. And many times what you discover in the company, that the people who know how to change the system are close to retirement, or they just retired and the only thing they are still in the office because they have nothing to do at home. That's a huge factor, because the moment they find a new hobby, then you have no idea how to change the system, right? So you have the most important item, and you have one person who can take off this one, and he has a backlog of 100 items. So recently having a conversation at my customer, and they say, this guy just returned from 2 weeks vacation, 160 tickets waiting for him, right? That's fun, except there's a lot of money involved into this one. By the way, those companies, in most cases, they still make money. That's kind of interesting thing, that we make money despite all those challenges we have, right? So on the other hand, if you do it well, especially if you move to less adoption, the thing is that any moment you can move one or more teams into the things that are important for you. And there's a great example, by the way, from the same company. And the situation is like, we're having a conversation about their priorities, and they say, hey, there is a bank, they're doing a software for banks, and there's a bank near us, and they're complaining that we haven't done something for 3 years, and they want it to happen yesterday. So what we can do? And we have a conversation, is it important? Can we ignore them for another 3 months or whatever? And I say, no, it's hard to ignore those people, we need to do something about it. So we're continuing this conversation, and the decision is, how about we tell them, they're super close to our office, so how about we tell them, we send a team from tomorrow, and the whole team is going to sit in your office till we fix the problem, and then you got this problem solved. So we can prioritize this item and move the whole team to solve the problem. And we send this information to the customer, and they say, well, we're not ready. They weren't ready for this kind of fast reaction, because they were assuming that the moment they start complaining today, 3 months from now, something will happen. So the situation that you start complaining and someone solved your problem in 24 hours, that was outside of the scope for them. So if you have it done well, if you don't have it done in less approach, Scrum approach, and what you can do is move one team, and if you need to, you can move 5 or 6 teams and deliver something to production. And this is exactly what we need. So one of the things is like again, what are the things in your organization that prevents you from focusing on the most important initiative, right? So the moment the priorities change, what make it is easy to move people, or is it hard to move people? And one of the things that we discover is, even if we can move people theoretically, there is plenty of good reason not to move those people. So for example, how easy it is in your organization to kill initiative. Because what we mentioned already, starting initiative is simple. Killing initiative is super hard. So a friend of mine was working with the telco in Poland, and what they discovered is that the project they're working on just doesn't make sense. So finally, the telco make a great idea of killing the projects. It took them a few weeks, but they finally make the decision. A friend of mine was working this as a coach, so he spent a few weeks there, then he moved to another companies, and he came back again 2 years later, and he meet his friend, and he's having a conversation over coffee, what you doing? And a friend of his, he says, you remember this project from 2 years ago? I'm working on closing this one. And the reason for that is because the moment you finish the project, it goes to some company account. Some department account. So depending on which department account it goes, the manager of this account has a bigger cost. So if you want to cancel the project that has delivered no value, so that's by the way a great idea, because it's not going to deliver any value. If you want to cancel this project, then you need to find a manager of department who will take those costs into his department. So the only reason we have this kind of managing finances in our organization is the reason it's take 2 years for killing that project. So one of the questions is how easy it is to kill that project. Again, the more project you have, the more work in progress you have, the less likely you're going to focus on the most important item, right? And related to this one, cooperation, and not just cooperation inside your organization, is the collaboration with your customer, with your user, right? So again, what prevents your organization from what prevents your developers from having a conversation with the users? And often, something you already mentioned, we have a separate department who talks to users rather than having developers to talk to users, right? And one of the things is unless we discover that having this conversation with the user is a good idea, it's just easier, because our developers don't know how to talk to users. And anytime I'm hearing, you know what, our developers don't know how to use, how to talk to users, I'm saying, you know what, when my kids were born, you won't believe it, but they didn't know how to ski. And you know what? They've learned. How come? So if you didn't allow your developers to talk to your user for the last 10 years, don't expect them to be super excited about having a conversation with the user. It's just easier. The thing is, if they don't talk to your user, you're guessing. And again, a slide from the very beginning, you're guessing wrongly, right? So how you do it? And I had this conversation with one company. They're making a software, internal software for the telco, and they say, we can't access our users. Our product owners, basically, which is internal, don't allow us to talk to users. Okay, so we get the conversation, how we can access those users, how we can reach those users, and you know, few weeks later, few months later, she write to me, hey, we managed to bypass our product owner and reach to the user. So we managed to get some questionnaire, we get some feedbacks, we get some form. So basically, you can get to user. The only thing is, do you want to get to a conversation with the user, right? Because often what you discover, you just make the life of your user super painful. So again, a favorite story from customer of mine, they went to their user, they go to the office of the users, they go to the customer, they go to the office, see how the users, the internal users are using the system. And what they see is that the user is filling the form, and at the end of the filling the form, they zoom out, click the button, zoom in, and fill the form again. Zoom out, okay, zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, and hundreds of times every day. And they say, why the hell is happening? And they go back to the office, they go to the designer, and they just discover the designer has a better resolution. So the OK button was there, so you didn't need to have a scrolling option. You need to see how the users fight with your system. And what's happening in some of the companies, they send people to see the users in action. So there is a grocery chain in Poland, and when you join this grocery chain, basically you are sent to grocery shop for 2 weeks. No matter what kind of position you join, you go there to learn how it look like from the user perspective of the system, not what you think that the user is going to behave, right? Right, this was already, but this is the last conference, so I need to show it as well. So you don't just change the process, right? You need to understand, what is the optimization goal, we call it less, or something I use like what is your success criteria? What you want to achieve, what you want to change. And often you have an interesting conversation. So there was one conversation with telco I had a few years back, and something I just basically ignore that time, and just learned a few years later that was important, is the CEOs taught to me something like, you know what, in every country has their separate CEO. That's a big chain of telco. And CEO in Romania, which is a separate country, they just implement Agile, and that was success. And I ignored this information, but his success criteria was to go to headquarters and say, hey, I have Agile, which is completely different from my success criteria. So we fail miserably in this transformation. But often what you discover is like your structure, the way you hire people, the way you reward people is completely opposite to what you want to achieve. Another example, there's another CEO coming to me and say, hey, we are mostly software house, but we have a huge business knowledge about the Polish market. And what we can do is create our own project, but no one is doing this one. We don't have our own initiatives. We can, but we don't do this one. And I start working with people, I have a conversation, and what I discover is like basically every department's main metric is, how it's called in English, margin. So basically, how much cost you have in your revenue. And if you know your revenue for the next quarter, then the easiest way to improve the margin is by reducing the cost. And the easiest way to reduce the cost is if I have this guy for like, I need him for like 50%, I just push him to some other department because there is always a department who needs this guy. And we end up with Rowan working in 5 projects at the same time. Because, it gets us better revenue, right? Better margin. And you know what? This is not the moment I go to Rowan and explain, hey, Rowan, you need to be more creative. You need to come up with more initiative. This is the moment I go to see you and have a conversation about, hey, how do you reward people? What are the biggest metrics you have, right? So something we already mentioned, do you have a narrow definition of your roles or you have a broader definition of the role? And also, what kind of people you hire? So less companies, what they do, they start hiring end-to-end engineers. So rather than a Java engineer, I'm engineer who would try to solve the problem. So we look for different people, which is kind of interesting because the moment you start the transformation, but it's rarely the situation you have end-to-end engineers. I would say few takeaways. So first of all, how you can make a collaboration on one item easier. So some things we already mentioned. So first of all, what we know already in LESS is create a cross-functional end-to-end teams, right? It just make a life of those people easier, right? But common code ownership is also a way of collaborating, right? So how you can make the collaboration on one item easier. The second perspective, which is super close to this one, is make the lack of collaboration harder. Sounds close, but the thing is the moment you ask this question, you find a different tool. So if you think about any kind of Kanban limiting work in progress idea, this is like this one, right? It's just hard to start new items on this one. So another thing was finance company in Poland, and when they moved to LESS, is that they say there is one rule: the moment you go into the office, you check the production environment. If there are any production environment, you work on those items. So don't do any software development till the production environment is stable. Then you check the pre-prod environment, and then you can code. Okay, so make sure that if there is a problem on production, people don't create more code and push it to production to see if it works, right? Make sure that you fix the problem first. So make the lack of collaboration harder. And we mentioned this already about the dependencies, so just few items. Well, how do we do this? So removing dependencies and competencies. So cross-functional teaming is one thing, but the second thing is, do people have time to learn when they are in the new team? So when they do the switch, which is awesome, and everybody talk about this one because that's great, because that's fun and all the stuff, but the thing is do you have time after the switch to learn? So I have a situation when we do switch in one organization. That was 30-ish people, right? And that was kind of interesting because they have a business-oriented analyst and they have a component-oriented developer. So every analyst basically worked with every developer because the developer was, code focused, like an area focused, and the business analysts were customer focused. And we switched to teams. We created 3 teams, and after a few weeks, what we learned, basically everybody's working in the previous way. So every analyst is ignoring the new structure, and they go to the developers. They know they can fix this problem because that was faster, because they didn't have time to learn new things. So despite naming the teams, they just basically ignore the new structure, and they still keep 30 people daily stand-ups. Which wasn't stand-up, by the way. So it was pretty long meetings. So give people time to remove this one. Permission. That's another thing. So even if you can do this, doesn't mean that you are allowed to do this. And this often happens we have a team they can deploy, but there is a separate DevOps, which is basically ops without dev in your organization, and they can only deploy to production. So can the team deploy to production, or do we need a separate team to deploy the production? The same with the code reviews. If you still keep the code reviews, do you have a dependency that there is one guy who need to do a code review or accept the architecture, right? So one of the things you can do is, as a learning opportunity, also with the previous slide, is you need to get a badge to be able to do code review. This is what happened in one of the finance organization in Poland. So to do a code review, you need to prove that you know this specific component well enough to do the code review. And this basically means that people are learning new things, so their teams is not blocked by other teams. And something we already mentioned, well, just because the people know how to deploy doesn't mean that your infrastructure is able to deploy. If you spend last 10 years making it harder for people to deploy, it's not going to be easier. And depending on the organization, this can be one people, this can be the whole team, just focus on making your CI/CD working, or the quality of the code working, so on a kind of static dynamic analysis. Have some people, so whatever you call them, is you can call them the Scrum Master, you can call them the technical lead, people who focus on how the teams can deploy, how the team, so the customer of those teams is basically, most cases, it's other teams, not the external customer, right? So how do you make those people to deploy to production? And this is often the case, especially if you're working in banks and you have a system from the 1960s. So this is something you need to implement hell a lot of money. Running of the time. So another QR code. I was talking about the lean software development. Some of the ideas are here already during Talkless conference, which we basically invite you in case you are in Poland, Warsaw, by November 17. So there's a lot of better videos. So you get the Buzzword, we had Craig Larman, we have Jürgen de Smet, and we will have even more. We have Victor. Hello, Victor. We have Victor coming this November to Warsaw. So that was advertising. And the last slide. Hello. Nice to meet you. I'm Tomek Wykowski. I'm certified Scrum trainer. I'm also less friendly Scrum trainer. Co-founder of Procognita company, which is based in Poland. And I guess I need to thanks for the great coffee for the organizer.